All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar about connecting Aveva System Platform to SQL. My name is Ilkansa. I am a product specialist with Aveva Select California, based out of our Irvine office in South California. I just want, can someone give me a feedback if you guys can hear me clearly, if you can see my screen?
We can hear you and see your screen, Ilkansa.
Very much, Amy. All right. So this is our second webinar today. Sorry, we had another webinar this morning regarding connecting Aveva Edge to SQL with my colleague Pierre Harry. He did a very good job, and I think that webinar is recorded. So if you guys are interested, please let us know in the chat, and we can send you the link for that recording. I believe there's also a YouTube video regarding that topic. So again, that webinar was about connecting SQL to Aveva Edge, and this is going to be connecting Aveva System Platform to SQL databases. I'm assuming that everyone who signed up to this webinar is familiar, at least to a certain extent, with System Platform Application Server. I won't be going into an overview or a lot of details about System Platform. I'll just assume that everyone at least knows the basics. And we're also going to talk a little bit about OMI, but I will take you through very quickly through how to build an OMI application so we can utilize that with the SQL Data Grid. All right. So first of all, let's start with what is SQL. So SQL Server is an application software for relational database management system that can be used for creating, maintaining, managing, and implementing the relational databases. It is very helpful when it comes to storing the data in the back end in order to process it. Just to set expectations, right? We will not be diving deep into SQL. This is not meant to be a SQL database webinar. This is specifically going to talk about how to utilize few elements, or the three different ways on how to communicate or how to connect System Platform to SQL, namely the SQL Data Grid, SQL Data Object, and the SQL script library that you see on the screen. So these are the three native ways to talk to SQL databases from Aveva System Platform. We will be diving deep into SQL Data Grid and then SQL Data Object, but the SQL script library, which is more involved, and I would say it's more complex to set up, will be probably postponed to another webinar or maybe even a workshop. Just to give you an overview, the SQL Data Script Library provides database integration using Orchestra scripting. It provides some benefits. So for example, I was talking about the SQL Data Script Library. It provides resources. So basically, your resources are managed more efficiently because the connection manager reduces the number of open connections to the database provider. This is one of the benefits of using SQL Script Library. This activity is known as connection pooling. There is very good documentation from Aveva regarding how this works. If you guys are interested, we can share that with you also. Just let us know in the chat. And you can also process scripts asynchronously, which reduces impact to the hosting engine during opening a connection, for example, to a data source, running SQL queries, or running SQL transactions. So this is just a very high overview of SQL script library. We will not be diving deep into that today. All right, so we will be talking about the SQL Data Grid, and just again, a quick overview. SQL Data Grid is a symbol that enables you to interact with the data stored in SQL databases. Traditionally, the SQL Data Grid symbol, which is delivered as an industrial graphic, is used in an in-touch application. It's always been used in in-touch applications. Basically, you can create these applications in a published or managed mode. However, today we will be embedding SQL Data Grid as an Orchestra application in an OMI. And if you're not familiar with OMI, it is the Operation Management Interface, and it's another visualization client for system platform similar to InTouch. I will go over different components of OMI briefly and show you how to build a very, very simple application on OMI. And we will embed SQL Data Grid in there. There aren't many, actually I haven't seen any manuals or guides on how to do that. Not sure why. Again, traditionally it's always been used with InTouch. So I've also created a video on how to embed the SQL Data Grid in OMI. I think this is a very interesting subject. So we'll be covering that in details. I'll be showing you a demo on how to do that. And just while we're talking about OMI, there is an OMI workshop that we're hosting at the end of May, I believe, or beginning of June, I'm not sure. And it's going to be about OMI, and it's going to be 3 hours hands-on free workshop. So if you guys are interested to learn more about that visualization client, please reach out to your account manager or sales rep or in the chat, and we'll send you the link to register for that workshop. And then the last thing would be SQL Data Object. In fact, I'm actually going to start with the SQL Data Object demo first because it's longer. And I want to make sure that I finish that during the webinar. It's only 30 minutes, so I'll do my absolute best to cover both topics. The SQL Data Object is used to store and retrieve data from a SQL Server database. Typical applications for this object include basic recipe management, for example, and database capture of attributes values. One thing to mention here, to stress here, is that these three methods are native to System Platform. You do not need to download any plugins or add-ins or any different models. They come with System Platform, and I'll show you where to find each one of these. So I think that's it for the PowerPoint presentation. We can jump into our virtual machine now. So I'll just stop sharing for a second. All right. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Thank you, Annie. If you guys have any questions at any point during the webinar, please feel free to type it in the chat, and I'll make sure to answer them towards the end. We'll have a Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So if you feel like you want to ask any questions, please go ahead and do that. As soon as you think of them, you don't have to hold them to the end. All right, so the first thing is we're going to start with the SQL Data Object first. And to do that, we're going to jump into our System Platform IDE. All right, let's see. So the first thing that I want to show you here is the template for the SQL Data Object. And you can find that I created a galaxy here and I call it SQL demo. It's a very simple galaxy. There's really nothing in here. I'm not communicating with any outside devices or anything. The SQL Server is also hosted on the same machine. So everything is going to be on my local host. Again, sorry, just to double check, you guys are seeing the virtual machine, right? Zoom is very funny. It doesn't really tell me which screen it's sharing. You guys are able to see IDE, System Platform IDE, right? Annie or here, if you can check. Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you, Megan. All right, so we are on IDE, System Platform IDE, and the first thing I'm going to do here is I am going to dig into the default templates and go to the assets. Again, as mentioned, this master SQL Data Object template comes by default with System Platform. So what I'm going to do is, because I can't edit the template, the first thing I'm going to do is to create an instance. And I'll just call that SQL Data Object. I'll make sure that it is placed under an area that I've already created before, under my platform. So I'll just drag and drop that under the SQL area. Alrighty, and I'll double click here to start configuring this SQL Data Object. Before we do that, let's go and check our database. So I'm going to open the Microsoft Server Management Studio. I don't have the latest system platform here. So this is a 2020 R2. I don't have the SP1, and I'm also on I think I'm on 2017 Microsoft SQL Server. So I don't have the greatest and latest. The same thing works on the latest versions, and it works also on previous versions. So it's the same exact configurations. I'm gonna sign into or log into the SQL Server. I'm gonna be using Windows authentication throughout this demo, just for the sake of simplicity. The other option would be using SQL logins. It's obviously more secure to do that, because if you use the Windows authentication, it means that anyone who can access or can log into this machine using their Windows logins or their OS logins can access and can manipulate your database. Because this is my machine and I'm the only one using it, I'm okay with using Windows authentication. But System Platform allows you to use both types of authentication. I won't be digging deep into that, but I'll show you where that's configured. So I previously prepared the database here. And again, this is very high level overview. I'm not going to be digging deep into the Management Studio here, but just to show you that I've created class specs. And in there, I have this table that has few entries here. Basically, it's few classes, sorry, and their length, rake, and angle. Basically, this could be used for manufacturing or something. So this is the database that I'm going to be manipulating today. And going back to my SQL Data Object, the first thing I need to do is to go and input the database server name. And again, because that's hosted on my local machine, I'm just going to type in localhost. And then as soon as I do that, it's going to go and fetch for databases on my localhost. It will give you this drop-down menu, basically. You can type in, but it will also provide you what it can see on your localhost. So I'm going to click on class specs, and it also sees the table in there. So I'm going to choose the only table that exists in this database, and I'm going to test connection. You need to make sure that the connection is successful, and then say OK. So then we're going to move to the design, and I'm going to click on Get from Database. So now it got the column names from my database, basically, and the data type associated to these columns. This doesn't, in the design stage, it doesn't show me the data yet. We will be able to see that in the data sheet later on. But before we do that, there's one important thing here is to make sure that you have an identity column. So when you set your database, make sure that there is an identity column here. If you do not have an identity column, it will complain about it on System Platform. I mean, you can just simply Google how to add an identity column to your database if you don't know how to do that in the SQL Server Management Studio. So once you have that and you have added you've connected to your database. So far, we have only connected. We know that we're connected because it fetched the names or the columns. But we still did not read or write. You can obviously change that from here. So no access, read only, read write, depends on who's working on the system and how, like whether you want to enable them to manipulate your database or not. So if you don't want your operators to be able to change anything, for example, you could just give them a read access or read only access. Same thing applies for the SQL Data Grid. We'll look at that later. So at this point, what I need to do is I can just come here and click on refresh, and it will read the data for me. So this is the same data as we just saw in the SQL Server Management Studio. It's reading the data that's available in the database. And in order to be able to read, in order to be able to write into the database, I'm going to have to create attributes that match these columns. So we're gonna have to create a class, and then we won't create the ID. We create the class, and then rake, and then the angle and the length. We create 4 attributes that be based on the data types that are associated to these columns. And if you don't know what they are, you could just fetch them from here, from the design, because it tells you, it indicates to you what is the data type associated to it. So rake, angle, and length are all going to be float, and then the class is going to be string. So we're going to go ahead and create these 4 attributes. I'm going to start with, and I won't be connecting them to IOs or anything. So this is just going to be class, and make sure that the data type is string, and then add rake, and this is going to be a float. I think, what was that? ST, that's ST angle. And it's also a float. And then the last one is TT underscore length. Okay. And then go back to my design page. Now that we've created the attributes, this object allows you to assign attributes to these columns. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the column. In this case, it's a row. It's displayed as a row, but it's initially a column in my database. And I'm going to assign an attribute. Before I do that, I'm going to have to save and close to save those attributes, because otherwise it's not going to be able to fetch for them. I will reopen the SQL Data Object one more time. Oops. And go to the design page. Come on. And assign attributes. So I'm gonna click on these 3 ellipses here and look for my object. This is the object that we've created, SQL Data Object. And we're gonna look for class attribute. There you go. This is the one. I'm just gonna say, okay, we're gonna do the same with the other 3. Just make sure that the data type matches. If you make a mistake here, it's gonna give you an error. Obviously, the more attributes you have, the more room for mistake. So the ST. All right, so now I've assigned all of my attributes to the existing columns. I need to, again, so if you refresh here, we'll be able to see the current data. What I'm going to do now is we're done setting up or configuring the object. You can always add scripts if you want to, for example, push data to the database or read data from the database every, for example, a specific period of time, let's say 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or whatever. All of these scripts can be added in here. You can add more attributes if you have more columns. You can, I'll show you what we can do. We can read, we can write, we can change some values, we can go up and down in the data rows. So now that we're done configuring the object, I'm gonna go ahead and say save and close. And I'm going to need to deploy the object. So out of the 3 methods to connect to the SQL Server, I would say the SQL Data Grid is probably, at least for me personally, is the easiest to set up. And then the SQL Data Object, and then probably the SQL Script Library. And that, of course, comes with a price. The SQL Script Library probably is the most flexible and gives you the most capability to connect to your, you can execute more complex queries, let's say, using the SQL Script Library. I would say that the SQL Data Object is somewhere in the middle, And I would say that the SQL Data Grid, which is the visual element, would be, again, the easiest to set up, but it comes with more limitations. So now that my object is deployed, I will view it in Object Viewer and open it here at the same time so we can see the changes that we're making on the database getting reflected. All right, let's try and put these side by side so it's easier for us to compare. All right, so on the right side, I have the object viewer. On the left side, I have my object open here. And the reason I do that is because I want to see the data changes immediately as I make them here. So we're going to go to the object. And then in the object, we're going to look for specific attributes. So for example, I want to see the class. These are the attributes that we made. I want to see the rate and the angle and the length. It's already reading class 1. So again, if you are, if you have basic knowledge at least about System Platform, you would know that Object Viewer is used to view the value, the quality, and the status. It gives you a timestamp of when was this data read. It communicates with the third party or with the source of the data, or whatever the data is coming from, whether this is a PLC or a database. It will be reading values in real time. So what we're doing here is, first of all, again, we just imported, or we're watching the 4 attributes, and then I'm going to drag and drop few of the controls that come with this object. So it's going to be attribute to DB replace command, to write from the attribute to the DB. And just one tip here, if you want to know what each one of these does, it's a good idea to check the help file. It's just, if you just click on this question mark here, that's the help file for the SQL Data Object. It will tell you in details what each of these queries or commands do. Great details, good examples there also. So again, I will only be going through very few of these. We won't have time to cover all of them, but I highly encourage that you have a look at the help file. The other one, so this is to write from the attribute to the DB to replace an existing data or a cell. And then the other one would be DB to attributes. And it's this one, so DB to attribute commands. I'm also going to do the records next command and the previous command. This is to go up and down in the lines basically, or in the rows. So all of these are disabled right now. That's why they're all saying false. We will need to make a change and then enable one of these commands, and then it will be pushed to the database. When it's pushed to the database, if we click on refresh here, we'll see that piece of data changing or a line added or something. All right, so let's do that. So we're reading class 1 right now. Let's say I wanted to make a change in class 1, and I want to change the angle here. So all I need to do is to double click on it and change the value. Let's say I'm going to change that to 90 and say OK. Now it changed here. It didn't change in the database yet. Even if we click refresh, it won't be changing. What we need to do to push it to the database is to enable this attribute to DB replace command. So what I'm going to do here and just say modify, let's say true, and OK. Oh. Replace command. Hold on a second. So let's enable that first, which is DB to attribute. Make sure that it's reading first. And then attribute to DB replace command. Okay. Now change data to 90 and apply. And then change attribute to DB replace command. I'm sure this is the one. Let's double click again and say true. And refresh. Now it's 90. So because it didn't read at the beginning, because at the beginning we had DB to attribute command as true, it was reading, but it didn't have, I think because this was enabled, the DB to attribute command, the DB the attribute to DB replace command was off by default. They can't be both on at the same time. So it's either you're writing from DB to attribute or attribute to DB. So what we needed to do is to read from the database first, and then make a change to the value, and then activate or enable this attribute to DB replace. And as you saw, we had 45 as the angle here for class 1, and we've changed it to 90. And when we refreshed, we saw that it's reflected in the database. This is a mirror of what we have in the database. You can always go and check it in SQL Server itself, but if you want, you could just use this data sheet here and just make sure that you're clicking and refresh every time you make a change. So what we did so far is we read from the database, we wrote into the database, we manipulated an existing cell in the database itself. And again, I don't think I have much time to go over the rest of these, but you can jump between the rows. So this is the next command is going to take you to class 2. And then if you go to the previous command, it's going to take you to the previous one, which is class 14. It will just go the other way around, basically. There's also one for the last line in your database. There are a bunch of them basically, and again, unfortunately, we don't have time to cover all of those today because I still need to jump to the SQL Data Grid. If you have any questions or you want to know more about these, please let me know. Again, this help file here is very, very good in explaining what each of these attributes or what each of these commands do. So that's that for the SQL Data Object. We do have about a 12 minutes video that explains how to do this. So if you feel like you've missed something today, we'll make sure to post that video link in the chat. And if you could do that, that would be great. That would be part 1 of the SQL videos series. Alrighty. So that's that for the SQL Data Object. I'm going to minimize my object viewer and go back to System Platform. Now, the first part of, I'll make sure to cover the first part for the SQL Data Grid in the next few minutes, just in case someone needs to drop exactly at 12:30. The first part is the tricky part. We usually use SQL Data Grid with InTouch again, and it's very easy to utilize it with Edge. It only involves dragging and dropping the symbol or the control in your, InTouch. It only involves dragging and dropping that symbol into your InTouch screen. But what we're doing here is in the graphic toolbox, just want to show you what it is. In the default content, apps, you can see all my apps. All of these are out-of-the-box applications that come with the operation management interface, all my. Then we're gonna make sure that we convert this .NET control, which is the SQL Grid .NET control, into an application to be able to embed it into OMI. And then I'll show you how to configure it also. So what we can do now is we need to go and dig for where this SQL Grid file is located, and then import it into our Galaxy as a orchestra application. We will not be able to use it as a symbol or just as a control in OMI. That's possible to do in InTouch. And there's so many tech notes and videos about how to do that with InTouch, and it's actually very straightforward. So today we're gonna have to do it in OMI. Therefore, we need to go and dig in and see where this is located and import it. So what I'm going to do now is, because I know where it's located, I'm just going to directly go to that file and show you how I'm going to import it. It's going to be in Orchestra, I believe. There's a little bit of digging here. and then framework, and then bin folder. This was not written in any of the guides, so we had to do some manual digging here to look for it. And it's actually this Invenza Systems Inc.'s SQL Data Grid User Control DLL. If you double click on that, you will see all the DLLs associated to this .NET control, which is the SQL Grid. So what I'm going to do is, to make life easy, I'm going to copy this and go to my desktop, create a new folder, call it the SQL Grid App, right? And I'm just going to paste. Okay, it's not going to do that. Let's go again. For some reason, it didn't copy. Orchestra, framework. That's why I memorize it, because I've done it so many times. Every time it doesn't copy. And this is the one I'm looking for. Make sure this is copied. I'm working on a SkyTab VM, so it's kind of tricky when copying and pasting. But I'm going back to my desktop, and I'm going to paste all of those DLLs that come with the SQL Data Grid control. Thank you, Annie, for posting both videos. So the first video there is for the SQL Data Object that we just went through. The second video is for the SQL Data Grid, which I'm going through. So if you need to drop for whatever reason, that video covers the exact same thing that I'm going to cover right now. We don't want you to miss out. So now that I have a folder that has all the DLLs that I'm interested in, and by the way, you can apply this for other things also. It's not just for the SQL Grid .NET control. This works with any .NET control as long as it has all the DLLs that are associated with it. So this trick can be applied with other .NET controls also when it comes to OMI. It's a little bit more involved than just dragging and dropping in an in-touch screen. So next, I'm going to import this as a Orchestra app. So again, instead of a client control, which is this one, I'm going to import it as an Orchestra app. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go and browse to this location where I just copied all of the DLLs. Again, this is easier to put it on the desktop, so that's why I put it there. So this is the SQL Grid app. I'm just going to click on OK here. Hopefully, it will import with no errors. It did give me some trouble before, but all right, let's see. It seems like there is an error, but I think I see the application. Hold on. Yeah, I see the application here. So I'm going to ignore that error for now because I see the application. As you can see, SQL Grid app is imported. I'm going to undo checkout. For some reason, it's checked out. All right. And as you can see now, we have imported it as an app. Again, as an OMI app. If you're not familiar with what those are, these are out-of-the-box applications that come with the OMI application. It has the same icon. It's the white shield with the globe in the middle. So what I'm going to do next to try and configure this is very quickly create a screen profile. And I apologize for exceeding the time. It's a very wide topic. So that's why we have other videos, so you guys can have a look at them later. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to my graphic toolbox, and I'm going to minimize this and create a screen profile very quickly. This is the first thing you need to do when you're creating an OMI application. Just leave the name as it is. And then I'm going to create a layout. And I'm going to call this SQL_layout. And I'll double click here to edit it. This is where you decide the different sections of the screen, and you can create more panes. You can divide this into different sections and all of that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to delete this pane, but this is how you create a pane. So this is our main pane here. I'm not going to create any other panes. All I need to do is just to go to the toolbox. Now that we have embedded or imported the SQL Grid as an app, it's just a matter of clicking on it, and then dragging and dropping. This is the one we're interested in. If you hover with your mouse here, you can see it saying SQL Data Grid User Control. This initially did not appear as an application. It was not possible to drag it and drop it into your OMI application. We had to do that importing as an orchestra application step in order to get it to this point. And as you can see here, I already see the controls for the SQL Data Grid application. I'm going to leave this the way it is. Just going to go to properties. So when you click on properties, these are the properties for the content of the pane. It's not the properties of the pane itself. There are 4 minimum requirements that you have to set up for this application in order for it to work. The first thing is the authentication mode. Again, for the sake of simplicity, I'm not going to make this SQL Server. I'm just going to make this Windows. Makes my life easier. This is my machine. No one else is using it. So I don't mind manipulating the database. The other thing is the the configured server, which is in my case is going to be the name of the machine. So in my case, it's just a local host, and then the configured database. Let's look at another database. Let's look at runtime, for example, just to look at a bigger database. I know this by heart because I've worked on this before. So it's going to be dbo.tag. So this is just one database that we have in our SQL Server. It's actually this guy here. So in the runtime, I want to see the tables, and there's this tag table. So it's ._tag. Okay. Going back to my layout. Again, just to recap, 4 things that we need to configure: authentication mode, configured server, and then the configured database name, and then the SQL query, which is the table name. There are so many other properties that you can configure. I'll leave that for you guys to discover. You all have access to this. Anyone who has System Platform has access to this. But these are the minimum 4. Without these 4, it's not going to work. So now that we've set up these 4 different properties, I think we're ready to go. What I'm going to do is just to show you one last thing here before we leave the properties. I'm searching for the property related to read, and just to show you that there is a read-only checkbox that I can check or uncheck here. Again, depending on who's using this application, whether you want them to be able to manipulate the database or not. But you can check read only, and it will make it read only. They will not be able to write into the database. So I'm going to leave it as read only for now because I'm using the runtime database. I don't want to manipulate that. I'm going to save and close. And the next step is related to OMI also, which is creating a view app. We'll do that very quickly. So these are the view apps. I'm going to create an instance of that, derived template of that. And I'm going to call this SQL app. Just going to add this here. Alrighty. So I'm going to double click on the SQL app that I just created. It's a view app for OMI. And the first thing to choose is the screen profile. I'm happy with that screen profile. And I want to use the SQL layout that we've just configured. And I'm going to say finish. It will pop up again, and it will enable us to preview. The next step would be creating a view app and placing it in your view engine. That's how it's done. I don't need to do that. I'll just show you the preview for now to save time. So this is what we have. This is the layout, and it's according to our single screen profile that we've created. I will click on preview and see if, obviously there's a warning here that says this cannot be used for production. This preview feature here is really cool in OMI. It enables you to see how your final screen is going to look like without having to deploy the application every single time. So if you're making small changes with the symbols or with the panes, it'll be able to show you a preview of that. I really like this feature about OMI, instead of having to deploy the entire application. All right, and this is the preview window. So this is my OMI screen. I have my SQL Data Grid application on the entire screen. I could have made it smaller. I could have added more panes to the right or left or on top. So what we're gonna do here, again, these controls here come with the .NET control that we have found already in System Platform. I did not have to create any of that. You could add a scripted buttons here. You could add retrieve or clear or any other scripted button in here if you want to do any more than just these controls. So the first thing I'm going to do is test, and hopefully it's going to work. So connection succeeded, meaning we have connected to the database. So now this is the second method of how to connect to the database or the SQL database using System Platform. The other one would be retrieve, and voila. So this has retrieved the .tag table from the runtime database. And again, I don't want to mess with this, so I made sure this is read only. I will continue for those who want to see how I connect to the other database and write to it, but for now we're only reading. So if you want this only to read the database for whatever reason, maybe you have a recipe management. It's the SQL Data Grid app on OMI, which can also be used in InTouch, the two visualization times for System Platform. So now that we're happy with this application, it's working, we have configured at least the 4 minimum configurations. Let's move to the next step, and it will be, I will shut this down and I'll just jump back to my layout. I'll edit the layout in order to edit my application. So in order to edit my properties, I have to go back to layout. So all I need to do now is I'll make sure that the authentication mode stays as Windows and configured server stays as localhost. I'm going to jump to the configured database, and that's going to be, I believe, class, was it underscore specs? I'll just double check quickly. I don't want to make a mistake here. So that's class underscore specs. And that's going to be DBOS1, I believe. And I'm going to leave everything else as it is, except for the read property, because now I want to be able to write into it. So now that's that. I'm happy with the settings. Just configured 5 out of these, maybe 60 or 70 properties. And I'm going to say save and close. Again, we have a document here that we can share with you guys that talks about the SQL Data Grid in detail. If you're interested, please let us know. We'll post these two or we'll email them to you. Alrighty, so that's that. Going back to my SQL app, which is this one, I'm going to refresh and preview. Say morning about not being able to use it in production. It'll take a minute there and it will pop up the preview. All right, so back to my OMI application. I'm going to test the connection first to make sure that I'm connected to the database and the retrieve. So this is the database that we were playing with earlier. All right. So the next thing to do here is, for example, let's say, I didn't show you this, I think, with the SQL Data Object, but it's also possible to add new lines here. So let's try our luck. I'll just give random numbers here. This gave me an error yesterday for some reason, and then it worked again. So let's see. I added a new line because class 15 was not there originally. I'm not going to add the ID. The database is going to take care of adding an ID to this row. And once I'm done with this, I just click enter, and then I need to click on write. And this is how to push the data that I've just edited into the database. So I clicked on write and it said success. So let's see. There are 2 ways to check that. So this is the database. For some reason, it doesn't refresh. Oh, not this. So I'm going to the class specs, and this is the table. There you go. So previously, it did not have this class 15, and this is a mistake, 2001. but it did not have this class 15 row. So we just wrote into the database. That proves that you can read and write, manipulate the database using the SQL Data Grid. I would say it is easier to use it in InTouch, but if you are an OMI user, you can still use SQL Data Grid. Mainly the SQL Data Grid is used for read-only, because if you're embedding it in your screens, in your SCADA screens, chances are your operators will be using this application. So most likely you don't want them to manipulate the database. That's a different role. So mainly this is used for read only, but in case you needed to write something into it, it's also possible. So again, just to recap very, very quickly, we've covered two methods of how to connect to SQL database using, let's say, local or existing features in System Platform. The first one is the SQL Data Object that we've created earlier, and the second one is the SQL Data Grid that could be embedded in either OMI or InTouch. And again, we've posted two videos on the chat that talk about the exact same thing that I've done today, in case you've missed something. And if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat. And that's it. I'll open the floor for questions, if any. And I apologize for taking way longer than the 30 minutes, but it's a very wide subject.
Perfect. Thanks, Alkamza. So our first question is it possible to insert data into the SQL database using the SQL object? Yes,
it is possible to do that. So if we go back here, and let me open this. Thank you. That's a very good question. It is possible to insert new rows. Yes, it is possible to create a new database also. Again, unfortunately, we don't have time to cover all of this. This is probably a workshop material, but as you can see here, there's so many different commands that you can use. And the one to do that is the, hold on. That specific command is the append command. So it's going to be attribute. There you go. Attribute to db append command. So I'll just add this here, and I'll go back to the data sheet here to see what we have. As you can see, once I refreshed it, it read exactly what's in the database. We've just made this change using the SQL Data Grid, this class 15. And it added the ID by itself, right? So if I go to class 15, let's say I click on this one, it's reading right now. So let's say db to attribute command. I'll just double click on this and say apply, okay. And then I'll enable this attribute to db append command. It's gonna write a line just after the line that I'm reading right now, which is class 1. So if I double click here and say true, okay, and refresh this, you should be able to see a new class. So if I call this, for example, let's write this, let's call this class 16. And say apply, okay, and then modify. Oh, there you go. So again, because I wasn't in the right order, I should have been after class, should have been class 15 and then class 16. It called it class 1 because it read exactly the same values as I was in. So when I create a new line, it creates a line with the current values that it's reading, if that makes any sense. So it was reading class 1. It read all of the values on class 1, including class 1, 60, 90, 200, and it created a new line for me. So this line between class 14 and class 15 didn't exist earlier. And we only had to hit refresh basically to see that. And then you can make the changes, obviously. You can jump back to that line and you can make the changes on the different values. But this is how you would add a new line to the database, yes. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you for attending. Appreciate it. Yeah, so the recorded version of this webinar is going to be exactly the same as the 2 YouTube videos that we have sent. The 2 YouTube videos are the demos for the SQL Data Grid and the SQL Data Object. But great question regarding the SQL Data Object, adding new lines.
Perfect.
All right.
We do have another question. Are these SQL connectors included in a special license package?
No, the answer for that is no. This is included in your system platform license. This is with the basic license. You do not need to spend any extra money for any extra licenses to enable these 3 methods. Again, these are embedded, inherited methods in system platform. The SQL Data Grid is a control, is a visual element. And then the SQL Data Object, you can find it here in your assets. It just comes with the templates, just like your other object templates, basically. And then the script is, again, inherited. So you can add your script, your objects as part of the SQL script library. So the answer, the short answer is no. You do not need to spend any extra money to enable system platform to talk to SQL. There are 3 existing methods to do that. That's a very good question. Thank you. Alrighty. Any more questions, Annie? I can see in the chat.
It looks like that's all the questions for now. So thank you all, Kanza, and thank you to everyone who attended.
Thank you very much, Annie. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, if you think of any questions later on, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than glad to help you out. Thank you.